Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the absolute most profound philosophical problems of the entire human experience. We're talking about the dilemma of free will. I mean, think about it. Did you freely choose to check out this explainer today, or was it inevitably predetermined by some invisible algorithm? It's kind of a fun thought experiment, right? But today, we're going to use the foundational work of Thomas Aletheia to seriously unpack human agency. We're going to explore where it actually comes from, and maybe more importantly, uncover why our fundamental misunderstanding of control creates so much unnecessary suffering in our lives. So, if you've ever felt like you're fighting an uphill battle against yourself or the world, well, you are absolutely in the right place. So, I want to start by asking you a very direct question, and I really want you to be totally honest with yourself here. Do you actually control your choices? When you wake up in the morning, when you're interacting with your family, when you decide to make a big career move, are those daily choices purely yours? Or are you simply acting out pre-programmed responses, old survival habits, and maybe some deep-seated fears that were passed down to you? It's a slightly uncomfortable thought, for sure. But look, to understand how to live a truly good life, we first have to figure out if we're even sitting in the driver's seat. Okay, let's dive into this by pulling up an ancient Stoic perspective from our source text. This idea comes from Epictetus, nearly 2,000 years ago. He said, "Of things, some are in our power and others are not." I know, it sounds incredibly simple, almost too simple, right? But this perfectly establishes the absolute philosophical baseline for understanding our own human agency. So much of our daily anxiety comes from blurring this exact line, from treating things that are completely, literally out of our control as if they're ours to manage. Part 1. Willpower versus Determinism, the Philosophical Extremes. To really grasp how we get this so wrong, we have to look at how history has viewed our ability to choose. Let's look at the two extreme ends of the spectrum. On one side, we've got the mid-20th century view championed by behavioral psychologists like B.F. Skinner. His scientific view completely sidelined free will. He argued that human behavior is strictly dependent on the consequences of previous actions, meaning, you are totally predetermined. But on the totally opposite extreme is the modern concept of willpower, which actually first appeared around 1874, right during the Industrial Age. It was viewed as this raw moral force, kind of like steam powering a massive train engine. The implication was that if you couldn't control yourself, well, that was a moral failing. And that places an absolute crushing moral weight on the individual. But here's the crucial philosophical point. Human behavior is neither purely predetermined, nor is it absolutely unboundedly free. The truth actually lies directly between these extremes. You do have free will, and your agency is very real, but it operates within very realistic and often completely invisible constraints. The people arguing for totally predetermined behavior just lack an understanding of how free will actually operates in the real world, while those touting its absolute supremacy, well, they're just denying its obvious limitations. Moving on to part 2, the illusion of control, or the bubble. Because we so desperately desire absolute free will, we tend to construct this psychological bubble around ourselves, essentially thinking we can control the universe. Our awareness becomes focused almost entirely on our own affairs, and that creates the exhausting illusion that life can, and honestly should, be under our direct, willful command. But step 1 of Aletheia's framework asks us to do something radical. Acknowledge unmanageability. Unmanageability is simply the quality of being difficult or impossible to control. It's not a punishment, it is a fundamental, completely neutral facet of reality. And acknowledging this fact, it shatters that mirrored bubble. It relieves you of the sheer, exhausting burden of trying to dictate the terms of the universe. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates our profound ignorance in the grand scheme of reality. NASA admits we know nothing, literally nothing, about 95% of the physical universe. Yet as humans, we arrogantly and confidently wager our willpower against the unknown every single day. Acknowledging our lack of control isn't a weakness, guys. It's just aligning our minds with the factual nature of existence. Let's look at part 3, distortions of the mind, the flawed maps. So, if external reality is unmanageable, what about our internal reality? Well, our own minds actively trick us into a false sense of agency all the time. This brings us to a classic philosophical metaphor, the map versus the territory. Think about it. Your thoughts are not objective reality. They're just models. They're maps. But when we confuse our flawed mental models for reality itself, our free will becomes severely limited. We end up navigating a fake world, reacting to monsters that aren't actually there, and totally missing the actual real paths forward. So, what do these flawed maps actually look like? The source text outlines several cognitive distortions that restrict our agency. All or nothing thinking traps us in extremes, like you're either a total, spectacular success or a complete failure. Then there's personalization, which tricks you into accepting the blame for things entirely outside your control. The need to always be right actually forces your mind to reject new, helpful information just to protect your ego. And the false dilemma restricts your free will by convincing you there are only two black and white options, when in reality there are so many more. These errors act as invisible boundaries, philosophically boxing us in and severely constraining our actual ability to choose freely. Part 4. The Perennial Struggle, Navigating Human Tension. This clash between what our minds construct and what reality actually is leads us to what Aletheia calls the perennial struggle. It is a deep, lifelong tension between who we are and who we want to be. And I really want to emphasize something here. If you feel this persistent ache, this quiet discontent in your life, you are not broken. This isn't some disease to be cured or a personal failure on your part. It is a universal human condition. Every single person experiences this. The goal isn't to somehow eliminate the tension, but to learn how to navigate it using the free will you actually have. Because when you try to exercise your constrained free will in the real world, you immediately hit these wild paradoxes. You want the power to feel safe, right? But to get it, you actually have to surrender your need for total control. You want total autonomy and freedom, but the very moment you get it, you're hit with the heavy burden of being entirely responsible for your own life. These are the underlying everyday philosophical tensions that actually dictate our choices. Which brings us to part 5, navigating your choices, the path forward. Knowing that our absolute free will is limited by a largely unmanageable universe, how do we actually live a good life? Well, here is the actionable path to resolving this whole philosophical dilemma. First, you absolutely must accept step 1, acknowledge unmanageability. Stop fighting reality. Second, recognize that raw willpower is incredibly short-lived. It's a quick burst of energy, not a sustainable lifestyle. So, step 3, you use that fleeting willpower for one very specific purpose, to form effective habits. Which naturally leads to step 4, sustainable self-discipline. As Aristotle so wisely noted, excellence is not an act, but a habit. You don't need infinite free will, guys. You just need enough to build good habits. And when you inevitably feel overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing weight of this philosophical dilemma, the text offers this brilliantly simple distillation. Do the next right thing. That's it. It reduces the vastness of time to a single, manageable moment. It shrinks the overwhelming complexity of life down to an action that is small, simple, and firmly grounded in reality. You don't have to control the entire future. You just have to make one good, realistic choice right now. Which leaves us right here. We've seen that absolute control is a total illusion, but your agency within the present moment, that is deeply real. So knowing that your choices are constrained by reality, by the cognitive distortions of your own mind, and by the perennial struggle, what is the next right thing you will choose? Take that thought with you today, apply it to the very next decision you make, and just watch how it changes your life. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.